Calow is the co-founder of MadLab in Manchester. He described it to me as a cultural institution hiding a makerspace, or maybe a makerspace hiding a cultural institution. I guess it depends on whom you're talking to and who shouldn't be seeing the other part, something like that. Anyway, it's a place where things get made, but things can be poetry, can be movies, can be content, can be bio things, can be machines, locks, or whatever. So it's kind of the generalization of the lab that we've been talking about. And so we'd like to understand the dynamics of this place and what actually happens in it. So Asa, if you want to come.
Fantastic. So, excusez-moi, ma français n'est pas trop bon. And so English. So I'm going to talk to you very, very quickly about my organization, MadLab. MadLab is its short name. The long name is the Manchester Digital Laboratory. We're comparatively a very young organization. We only got started in 2009, but we've come a very long way very quickly. And we've learned a lot on the way, which so hopefully some of that will be of interest to you guys. So, first up, here's our building. So, the organization was founded in 2009. We very quickly moved into this building, just here, you can see in January 2010, and that's kind of when we really hit the ground. MadLab was conceived as a grassroots institution. Variously gets called a makerspace. We also describe it as a community space for science, technology, and art. So when we first got started, there were, I'm an engineer myself, and come from this idea that knowledge is there to be shared. And there were various sort of groups in Manchester at the time that were doing this, but they were doing it in the backs of pubs, and there was like 3 or 4 of them. So the very first thing that we did was we stuck a flag in the ground, and we said, here we are, this is MadLab, this is a home for all of these different groups, all of this knowledge sharing to happen. So we started with 4 groups, and those were 4 groups that we as the founders were all a part of. So it turns out that this whole kind of idea of sort of community and knowledge sharing is an incredibly powerful idea. Because now we're up to the point where we've got around about 40 groups meeting on a monthly basis. And then on top of that, we've got a whole range of events, exhibitions, one-offs, filmmaking jams, hack days, all kinds of other stuff as well. It's an incredibly vibrant space. And those 40 groups, they cover. They run the whole range from new technologies. So of course, we have things like 3D printing and wearables and open data and these kind of sort of like technologies that are very much kind of the moment now. But they sit alongside photography and filmmaking and jewelers network, book clubs and like reading groups and all these kinds of things as well, which kind of give more of a sort of a wider kind of life to the space. So I guess one of the very, very first lessons that we learned was the power of the network effect. Sort of what happens when you mix all these different networks under one roof, when you sort of pack this kind of community of communities all into one place. Of course, the very first thing that happens is you start getting cross-fertilization between different groups. People who come in for one thing, they find that there's this whole other world that's open to them that they can get involved in. And from talking sort of earlier, it's like saying that sort of amateurs are replacing experts. And actually what we find is that because of the way these communities work is that somebody who's an amateur in one network is an expert in another and vice versa. So you get this incredible kind of range of knowledge transfer. And speaking professionally, that's very important because it opens your eyes. It widens your knowledge base, opens you up to new ideas. So you're not just kind of stuck in the technology, you can kind of bring in all this other stuff to bear. So very early on, sort of one of the things that came out of these different groups was courses. So we have a professional development strand. And this was partly a financial necessity because we kind of set the space up first and then figured out how to pay for it afterwards. But also because it was just kind of, there was a real need there for some of these groups and some of the people who are incredibly passionate about what they do, as a way to sort of formalize the structure whereby they can kind of pass that on to other people, and we can create this kind of this sort of program of kind of interestingness that people can get involved in. So it's like from within our professional community, you have people like so that Mike Little, who's one of the co-founders of WordPress, runs our WordPress course. We run an interactive video course that's one of a kind in the world. So we have sort of people who come in from like Ireland, Canada, the US to come and attend this course, which it's an incredibly special. One of the other things that we have running is we have sort of these long-running projects, sort of strands. So there's kind of very early on we kind of realized this was a great opportunity for us to scratch our own itch. So there's kind of different projects so we have a really strong under 18 project, which is just absolutely fantastic. So, and again, this is now, we're going to be working for these guys one day, so it's important to kind of get in there early and sort of, and kind of introduce them to, to the sort of concept of kind of hacking and making. That's incredibly powerful. Last week we held an event for under 18s, and we had 120 kids along. Certainly within the UK, it's one of the biggest within the UK. We have a DIY bio strand, a do-it-yourself biotech, which I think is something that my colleague spoke about last year. So this idea that you can kind of democratize access to what was formerly quite a complex technology. This thing that you see behind you is a PCR machine. So this is a piece of machinery that you use during the process of DNA fingerprinting and exploring your own genetics, your own genes. The typical cost of one of these machines is about 2,500, 3,000 euros. We built one out of hardware parts. Again, sort of that idea of amateurs and experts being one and the same. I was working alongside a guy who was an amateur biotechnologist, but he built medical equipment as his day-to-day job. So he was just like, yeah, of course, this is easy. We can knock one of these together. Absolutely fantastic. Also, it's very important for us because we have one foot in the community, and also we act as an institution in its own right as well, which puts us in this kind of interesting sort of like bridge between sort of institutions like city councils and local universities, and the sort of the grassroots kind of community that MadLab is made up of. So we can act as a bridge for that. So we've running events with Manchester City Council, so doing things like open data hack days. Building an environmental sensor network for those guys, working with universities to bring some of the kind of like maker practices and kind of maker culture kind of into universities and sort of work alongside some of their computer science departments. We've also done things whereby one of the most interesting projects we did was working with a hard-to-reach community, so sort of homeless, recently homeless, people with alcohol and drug problems, working with Lancaster University and working with MadLab to see if we can kind of use this sort of making as this kind of way to sort of, for everybody to kind of sort of connect and kind of produce something that's sort of interesting. So that's kind of one of the But moving on to kind of lessons learned, I think one of the key lessons for us has been machines don't make things, people make things. And as a space, there are other spaces around Manchester that are possibly like better resourced. I would love to have like some of the equipment, like some of the kind of like big machinery that say for instance the Fab Labs have, but we don't. We're in a very fortunate position in that those guys are just down the road, so we have a very kind of a very sort of free-flowing agreement with those guys, so that we send people down there to build stuff, and then they send people back to us. It's really great. I think sort of one of the one of the advantages of being where we are is that sort of people are the kind of people drive it, and also sort of as machines kind of go out of date. Like organizations like us, as machines go obsolete, we can't replace those things very quickly, whereas people never become obsolete. Another very key lesson learned for us was that this idea that you can create this kind of you can bring everybody out of their comfort zone, whether those are sort of grassroots communities, with those people working in different institutions. And by providing this kind of this alternative space, this sort of neutral zone, where everybody coming into it is coming into it on exactly the same level as kind of being new to making, is incredibly important. And one of the things that we found is that we have this really rich relationship with institutions, whereby they see MadLab as sort of organisation where you can come and play. So for us, because we're still quite small, we can move a lot faster than some sort of institutions that have sort of like particularly sort of where there's a lot of procedure there or a lot of protocol there. Whereas in organisations like ours, pragmatism trumps protocol. So providing you're not doing anything daft, then that's kind of good and that kind of works. So you can kind of experiment with things in a very very fluid way. And also, like providing tremendous amounts of support there as well is incredibly important. Another lesson learned is that mess is good. So this is kind of, I guess it's kind of a variant on how great play is. But play is, mess is kind of, it's very similar to play. It's play plus plus. So it's this kind of idea that as scientists and engineers and as policy developers, so the idea is to kind of take something that's really complex, and you want to try and sort of engineer as many of the variables out of it as you possibly can. So you can kind of like model something in the simplest possible way. And this way you can kind of make sense of it. What we do is we take models that are already set, and then we just introduce variables into them and just sort of like play with them and kind of make a mess there. And what you find is that really, really interesting things come out. I think sort of because we're a very young organisation, and because we've come so fast and so quickly, we've had to learn a lot very quickly. So MadLab is neither a traditional top-down organisation, although we do have a management team. It's not a bottom-up organisation because we have a management team. It kind of exists in the sort of kind of interesting but sort of difficult kind of grey area somewhere in between. And so we've learned an incredible amount just by sort of like working out kind of where these sort of how to bridge these two things and how to fit them together. So along the way, we've had like difficult environments. So like working with an example of a particularly excellent project. So working with the hard-to-reach communities and Lancaster University. Sort of we started coming at it from a very sort of technology-led sort of background, and then we found sort of very early on that like you're dealing with people with drug and dependency issues, and this kind of stuff just doesn't it doesn't fly. So you can't kind of introduce wearables into sort of into an environment where people are likely to lose these things, or they can't find like sort of battery chargers or like these sorts of things. So you have to kind of find new ways to adapt. In that instance, we actually fell back to a particularly excellent analog technology called paper. So we had these. We created these machines. That was an Internet of Things project, whereby you had a machine there. In order for, if you were a homeless person, you wanted to get hold of information. Sort of rather than it being sort of pinged to you in a digital way, it's just you had an RFID card and you tap this machine, it gives you a bit of paper, and that's great because bits of paper never run out of batteries. But along the way, we went through sort of several kind of different sort of design processes. So I think that's about it. I'm going to be around for the next couple of days. So if anyone's got any questions or seek me out and come talk to me, and that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you say you were going to be around for a couple of days?
Day and a half.
Okay.
Well, yeah, tomorrow. So.
Okay, because I'm sure that there's a number of people working on Fab Labs or X Labs around here who might like to take you around, touring, or discuss it. So, les porteurs de projets Fab Lab, n'hésitez pas à aller voir ça, puisqu'il reste encore une bonne journée et demie en tout cas. Just a few questions. One of them was, or a series of very, very practical questions. Is there a full-time team in the MadLab? People who make a living out of it?
Yes, there is. Yeah. Personally, I still divide my time between being a freelance creative technologist in MadLab, but we have a full team in place at MadLab. So, yeah.
Okay, and how do you actually pay for the space and the management and the team? If we can ask that question.
That is a very good question, because, like I was saying earlier on, we set it up first and then figured out how to pay for it afterwards. So it's a real mix. We both do venue hire to some of those organisations, so like venue hire to people like the BBC and local universities and science, like even the Science Museum quite recently as well, and like City Council. The professional development, the training courses that we run, those also go into it. We also take on projects of our own as well, so these kind of self-initiated projects. So, where we put together a team and find a pot of funding that's appropriate for that, and then build a project. So it's a real kind of mix of sort of a patchwork quilt of income streams.
Okay, and the last question was that you were talking to us about institutions such as the City Council using the MadLab so that they could experiment and play around. Is this actually producing real change after that, or is it mostly about playing around? Can you see effects on the ground beyond the experimentations phase?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that, the sensor network is a very real example of that. So that's a collaboration between ourselves and the City Council, and that's ongoing at the moment. We're actually also getting to the point now where the City Council has been promoting something called the Living Labs project, which is a European-funded project, and they're now going to embed that team within MadLab. So we're strengthening the ties between the City Council, and again, that's kind of going forward to do more of these kinds of projects in the future.
So that's a direction that some of you might want to take as well. Thank you very much, Asa.
Thank you.